Well, as you know, I mentioned last week there's a veritable army of journalists in Canberra whose professional purpose is to keep the Australian voting public and those interested in politics accurately informed. Yet right up until election day, there was barely a journalist across the country who was prepared to say, if I'm allowed to be immodest, as I said over and over again, that Morrison couldn't get 76 seats. As you know, I made that clear in my Thursday broadcast on the eve of the election. I outlined where I believed the coalition was in trouble, and with the exception of my comments on Tasmania, those observations were also correct. I made the point that the real question of the election was whether Albanese could get to 76, and on the Thursday before the vote, I told you, my viewers, that I believed he could. Why am I telling you this now? Well, also last week, I interviewed Professor James Allen, the Garrick Professor of Law at the University of Queensland. He was talking about the crisis in the Liberal Party, which is not my subject right now. Professor Allen, though, has pointed to the American polling operation Rasmussen. And as he rightly says, over the past two presidential elections, they've been pretty accurate, indeed more accurate than many left-leaning pollsters. And he now tells us that Rasmussen released a survey in America last week, as it turns out, of 1,000 likely US voters. The survey was conducted on May 11-12. The poll showed, amongst other things, that 80% of voters believe that, quote-unquote, fake news is a serious problem in the media. 56% said it was very serious. 9 in 10 Republicans, perhaps understandably, said it was a serious problem. Well, how much fake news were we served up during the 6-week election campaign? Why would 58% of American voters agree with the proposal that the mainstream media are, quote, the enemy of the people? As Professor Allen argues, it's hard to see how any other cohort of Americans, including politicians, could be held in lower esteem or viewed with more contempt than members of the press. Now, of course, Australians know all about this. We were fed hours and hours of fear and alarmism and hysteria over coronavirus, and a greater fear that none of what we were being told could be challenged. And as you know, anyone who dared to challenge was attacked, silenced and condemned. As Professor Allen argues, quote, almost nowhere did you see a questioning set of journalists who doubted the lines they were being fed by heavy-handed governments, unquote. And that, of course, is true. Anything criticising what was spewed out by public health officials was largely rubbished. And indeed, dare to disagree and you were cancelled. Professor Allen makes very specific observations about the police. Like Professor Allen, I have always supported the police because of the difficult work they do, the poor pay they receive, and the way in which some treat them and abuse them, especially female police officers. Like Professor Allen, I've always argued that the police have a tough job, which they perform very well under difficult circumstances. But then Professor Allen says this, and I quote, "Go back and watch again police in this country manhandle a pregnant woman, kick and attack lockdown protesters, spray them with pepper spray, throw to the ground a man at an airport, seemingly minding his own business." The list of egregious examples of policing, according to the "we are here to enforce these brutal, illegal, quibbling, despotic COVID rules as strictly and as uncharitably as we can," unquote. Now, of course, this wasn't all police. But you might remember in the streets of Sydney, people woke to see police with guns, armed. The very thing that many residents, especially in southwest Sydney, had left European countries in order to escape. Who in the media challenged this on behalf of the public? Professor Allen asks the question that needs to be asked. Why is the vast preponderance of young journalists activists for the left? We know the answer, but who's going to address the problem?